Hello and welcome to the introduction to DecidArch, the game you will play on making architecture decisions. My name is Remco de Boer. I'm a partner at ArchiExcel, a Dutch architecture consultancy, and I'm also affiliated to the Vrije Universiteit, where I lecture the yearly software architecture course. Now, one of the key things about software architecture that you need to know is that software architecture is decision making. A classical view on software architecture is that architecture is solely the blueprint of the software. So architecture then describes the structure in terms of components and connectors. An alternative and in a sense complementary view is that architecture is not only that, but it is also, and maybe in essence, the manifestation of the architectural design decisions that the architect took in order to arrive at this structure, at this blueprint. So in that sense, producing an architecture entails making a series of decisions. And it is this series of decisions that describe why the architecture is the way it is. So as a designer, as an architect, you are faced with a series of design issues, also called concerns. And these issues, they are sub-problems of the overall design problem that you want to solve. And typically, every design issue has several alternative solutions, and they are the design options that are available to you. And as a designer, as an architect, you make a design decision to resolve each issue. And that decision-making process then involves you choosing the quote-unquote best option among the possible alternatives. And this, of course, is difficult because there is no a priori best design. Design is in that sense what we call a wicked problem. You don't know the optimal solution. The only thing that you can aim for is a solution that satisfies the concerns of all the stakeholders involved. Now let me show you a picture that depicts this. So what you see here is that what you could call the problem space entails this design problem that you are aiming to solve. And in the problem space, you can identify sub-problems or design issues that contribute to the overall design problem. And then in the solution space, you have different design options, different options for every sub-problem that you aim to solve. And among these design options, you pick what you can consider the best option for that sub-problem. Now, this picture may give you the impression that the problem space and the solution space are distinct, but they are not. They're actually intertwined in what we call the design space. So what that means is that every time you solve a subproblem, you resolve a design issue, and you select among the alternatives what you consider to be the best option available, you actually introduce new design issues. So the design space is the space of the possible designs that can be achieved by choosing different sets of alternatives, and it entails the problem space and the solution space. So what you see here is what could be a typical path that an architect took throughout the design space. And the first issue that they considered here is which architectural style are we going to apply? And the options identified here are a client-server style and a monolithic style. And the choice here is to use a client-server style, and then immediately a new issue that you introduce is the question, which client style are we going to apply? Will it be a fat client or will it be a thin client? And then after the choice for a thin client, a new issue to resolve is how flexible is the user experience. Are we going to put the client in a separate user interface layer or not? And then, in this case, all the way down the line, there's eventually a choice of which programming language to use, which again, obviously, tells something about the libraries that are available to achieve everything that is constrained by the previous design decisions that you took. And this looks like a sequential path, but as you will probably notice, these options that you have for the different design issues, they're not necessarily independent. So a decision that you took for a previous design issue may actually constrain the options that you have for a later design issue. And with that in mind, um, finding your way through the design space and arriving at a solution that actually satisfies your stakeholders, it is quite an achievement. And this is what the game is about. So the game that you will be playing focuses on the decision-making process. In the game, you will have to deal with multiple stakeholders, each of them with their own concerns, and you will encounter various design options, each with their own pros and cons. And in addressing the concerns of the stakeholders and in selecting among these design options, you will have to make trade-offs. There's no solution or decision that you could take that solves everything in the architectural design. There's actually always the case that if you address a particular quality attribute, for example, security, that the decision that you take to improve the security may actually negatively impact some other qualities. So, for example, improved security typically affects the usability of the system, since now people have to put in their login or use a two-factor authentication token or whatever. So you will encounter these types of trade-offs in the game, and important, you will also need to cooperate. So this is not a game that you play against each other, it's a game that you play with each other. So in this game, DecidArch, you work together as a team of software software architects to design a software system for a project and its stakeholders. And your goal is to address all stakeholders' concerns within the time limit and, more importantly, to ensure that all stakeholders are satisfied and that the outcome of the design process is actually an architecture design or a series of architecture design decisions in this case that corresponds to the concerns and the quality requirements that your stakeholders have. And in the game you will encounter different types of cards. There's a single project card that gives you a brief description of the project that you are working on. Then there is a couple of stakeholder cards that describe the stakeholders in the project and the quality attribute requirements that they have. So here on the screen you see the card for a user of the system, the social news platform that is the project that you will be working on. And their quality attribute requirements entail usability, security, performance. And you see a short, brief description of the requirement that the user in this case has, but it's also expressed in a quality attribute priority. So usability has a higher priority for the user than security, and it's at an equal level of the performance quality requirement that the user has. So the higher the number here, the higher the priority. Then you find concern cards that describe different options also, how you could resolve that concern, and you will encounter event cards. And more about these cards in due course. First about the mechanics of the game. So the game runs in turns, and every turn you encounter the same steps. So in a turn, you as a group draw a concern card. And here on the right hand side, you see in more detail what you will find on a concern card. So it starts with an identification of the concern just to make the cards uniquely identifiable. But then you find a brief description of the concern that you need to address. So in this case, the concern card says the users need to be able to upload articles on the platform, and how should the system store these articles. So storing articles on the system is the concern that you need to address. And then at the bottom half of the card, you find different options. And in this case, there are 3 options listed. And for each of the options, you also see the positive and potentially negative impacts that the options have on the different quality attributes. So as a group, you draw a concern card, and then after studying the card and the options that are available, each player, independently from each other, suggests a design option to address this concern. And then after each of the players has prepared their decision suggestion, the group collaboratively discusses the suggestions, and together you decide which option for this concern should be chosen. Now, to support this decision-making process, the game uses templates. So you as a player will use these templates to record your design decisions. And there's 2 types of templates in the game. There's a decision preparation template for each individual player, in which you will note down the individual suggestions. So everyone will first work for every concern card with their individual decision preparation template to write down what they consider to be the right option for this particular concern. And then, as you see here on screen, you also write down the what we call rationale. So that's an explanation of why you suggest that option. And in practice, this design rationale, which is linked to the decisions that you make, is actually something that is very valuable to keep track of with respect to the architecture, because afterwards, if you need to explain why the design is the way it is, it's the design rationale that tells you that. It gives the explanation of and the corroboration, in a sense, of the architectural design. Now, once all the players have done that, you move to the decision-taking template, where for the same concern, you now discuss the suggestions that all the players have prepared. And then, in the same sense as for the individual preparation templates, you write down the concern, the chosen option, and then the rationale why that option is chosen. And that can be, of course, a combination of rationale that each of the individual players prepared. And as you see here, in addition to the chosen option and the rationale, you also write down the availability, maintainability, performance, security, and usability impact of that decision, which at the very end of the game you need to calculate the end score. So this happens a couple of times, and every time that a concern card is drawn, you have the same way of proceeding. Everyone prepares the decision, and then there is a group discussion, and you choose the option that you as a group think is the most viable alternative. And then after 4 concern cards have been played, an event card is drawn. And an event card describes some change that applies to the project. So what you see here is that in the project there is a new CTO, And this particular CTO is not amused by the amount of money that is spent on code maintenance. And she decides that maintenance is now the top priority for all projects, including yours, which means that the quality attribute priority for, in this case, maintainability changes. So now you have a stakeholder, represented as the owner, who changes their priorities with respect to the qualities that need to be in place in the designed architecture. And this, of course, means that you may have to reconsider your previous design decisions to address the effects of this event. Now that you know that the QA priority for maintainability has changed, has become more prevalent, are you still happy with the design decisions you took? Or do you need to change some of the options to other alternatives in order to address the new situation better than before? And this also implies that you are more than welcome to go back and change decisions that you took previously. You're not forced to stick to the decisions you took earlier in the game, but you can trace back and change any decisions that you took previously. And for every concern and every option, every design option that you have, you always need to consider the impact that the design options have on the system's quality. That is part of the core mechanics of the game. And while you take these decisions, you need to be aware of any inconsistencies between your design decisions. They're not noted on the cards, but some of the options that are available may contradict each other or may not be in sync with each other. So if you encounter that situation, you should be aware that you don't take any conflicting decisions by choosing options that are available throughout the game that are not compatible. And while you are looking at the design options that are on the cards, you're also free to propose new design options. And obviously, if you do that, you also need to consider the impact of these options on the different quality attributes. And during the game, you encounter situations where you're actually challenged to think about these new design options, and these situations will be indicated by question marks on the concern cards. So some concern cards may have not all the slots for the design options filled out, and some of them may have a question mark to prompt you to think about any other alternatives that are available. Likewise, some of the concern cards may not have spelled out all the impacts on all the quality attributes and may indicate with a question mark that there may be more to these options and prompt you in that respect to think about any additional impact that you can consider to be part of choosing that option. Now, the stakeholder card and the quality attribute priorities give an indication of the level that you need to achieve in terms of the satisfaction of that particular quality attribute. So here you see again the user with usability, a quality attribute priority of 2. This means that this level of satisfaction needs to achieve at least 2. And that means that at the very end of the game, the number of pluses for the quality attribute usability needs to be at least 2 more than the number of minuses. And this gives you an impression of how you can win the game and how you can calculate the score. So after the game ends, you will, in a series of 3 steps, calculate the final score and then determine whether as a group you won the game. And the first step is to investigate whether all the quality attributes are positively affected. So are there any quality attributes where the sum of the negative impact, the minuses that you scored along the way, is higher than the number of pluses? Then that quality attribute is negatively affected overall, and that immediately makes you lose the game. So ensure that all the quality attributes are at least positively affected. And then thereafter, you will investigate whether all the stakeholders are sufficiently satisfied. And you will do that by comparing the QA priority that the stakeholders have with the outcome of the pluses and minus impact that you have on each of the quality attributes. And then the final step is to consider whether you succeeded to solve all the concerns within the allotted time. And if there are any unaddressed concern cards left, that will give a deduction on the end score that you obtain. And then the final score will tell you in a comparison with several brackets how well you did with respect to winning the game, or if you have insufficient score at the very end, we will call that a loss. But the main thing about this game is to enjoy and be aware of the dynamics that are involved in making architecture decisions. Now, about the game itself, this is originally a tabletop game. And here you see a situation in which we played the game in a previous setting where people are surrounding a table in groups of 4, maybe 3, and they're playing the cards game with actual physical cards. Now, obviously, that's not going to happen today. Um, and since we are all online now, we actually moved the game to an online game engine that we programmed in Google Sheets. And I will show you how this works by going to the Google Sheet. But the thing that I want to make you aware of is that in order to play the game, you actually need to have a Google account, because you need, as the very first step to play this game, you need to make a copy of the game card engine to your own Google Drive so that you can actually run the scripts that are part of the game engine. In the game, you will find 3 interactive sheets. The game table, which you see here, which is where you will find and draw the different cards. And then you have the decision-taking templates, an individual one for each of the players and a group decision-taking template as part of the stack of sheets that are in the game sheets. And then you have a scoring sheet. And I will now go to the online version of the game to show you how this works, kind of a little demo. And the first thing that you do if you start this game is actually press the button Start New Game. Now, the very first time you do this, you may encounter this warning message which says that there are scripts in the game and you need to give permission for these scripts to run. You can simply press Continue, and then with your Google account, it will give you an additional warning that this is not a verified app, which is true. But by going to Advanced and then go to DecidArch, and Google labels this unsafe, but that's simply because the app has not been verified by Google. You can continue and then say allow. And this is a one-time authorization that you need to do, and now the scripts that are in the game engine that are actually involved in picking a card and placing it on the game table are able to run, and that's the next thing that you will do. So first, study the project and the stakeholder cards. You will find that there are 2 stakeholders in this project, a user and an owner. And then once you are happy to start as a group, one of you will run this game and share it with the others on screen, and that person will be responsible for drawing the cards, obviously. And then, as you see here, the first concern card is dropped on the table, and this just continues until you have drawn 4 cards, and then the 5th one, and in this case it goes a bit off screen, but you can scroll. You will see that here you will have an event card, and then just as I explained about the game dynamics, you will address all the concerns, and then the event happens. You will inspect whether that has any effect on the game or on the decisions that you took. And then after the event has been resolved and the impact has been assessed, you draw a new card and it starts a new line. The old ones are still available at the bottom line, and so you continue. If you press Start New Game, you will find this confirmation message. Be aware that if you actually start the game anew, then the game table will be cleared, and the decks of cards will have been reshuffled. So don't do that. Once you've started the game, don't restart the game unless there's a very good reason to. If you see here at the bottom hand of the screen, there's a couple of additional tabs available. Here you will find the decision taking template to write down the decisions you take as a group. And of course, every player, and you need to figure out within your group of players who will be player 1, player 2, player 3. This is just a label. Each player has an individual template to prepare their own decisions. And you can just simply write the concern ID, the suggested option, and the design rationale. At the very end, you will go to the scoring sheet, and here you will find more details about how to calculate the score that I just briefly explained at the very end of the game. And here you will see the brackets that determine how well you did and whether or not you won or lost the game. So as long as you have more than 0 points at the very end of the game, you can consider yourselves a winner. Right, that concludes the introduction to the DecidArch game. Looking very much forward to meeting you all in person at the start of the ISAPS Software Architecture School, when we will play the game in a live setting and we get a chance to meet. Looking forward to it.